Going on, and happy Monday, golf fans. So I hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. I hope you had a nice Father's Day. This video, we're going to talk a little bit about the Travelers Championship for this week. I'm going to show you how I identify the key stats for the week, which things are most important, things that we're going to use and try and identify for our model to try and identify players that we think are going to play well this week. But before we get into all of that, I just wanted to talk about the U.S. Open. That was an absolutely phenomenal event, as predicted. It's one of my favorites of the year. Torrey Pines was a fantastic setup. It played extremely difficult, as you might imagine. We talked about this last week. Ultimately, Jon Rahm ended up taking the trophy. And honestly, the leaderboard, I don't think I've ever seen a more stacked Sunday leaderboard than yesterday. We had all of the top players in the official World Golf ranking at the top of the board. Basically, everyone was in 2, 3, 4 shots of the lead, entering the back nine. Unfortunately for yours truly, Rory and Xander both fell off, as did most people, leaving Jon Rahm to basically make birdies on 17 and 18 and take this thing down. Those putts that he made were absolutely ridiculous. The one on 17, absolutely incredible. It was super fast. I think it broke maybe like 7 feet, which really shows to win an event, you really have to bring all of the pieces of your game together. And Jon Rahm did just that. He basically, did it through his all-around game, off the tee, just some absolutely ridiculous wedge shots from about 100 yards in. That's kind of his bread and butter from watching him a lot. But then making those key putts down the stretch. Jon Rahm is just absolutely ridiculous. Let's take a look at the leaderboard quick, because I think there are a couple things that I did want to highlight from last week before we get into the video. So again, Jon Rahm taking this thing down at -6. He was our number one play in the model. He was only 10-1. He was the betting favorite. That's typically not where I play. I've basically set things up where, I'm banking on taking home a certain number of winners throughout the year, and that 20-1, 30-1, 40-1, 50-1, and hopefully beyond range. So missing out on Jon Rahm at 10-1 is not a huge deal for me, but we did highlight him as the number one play. I did use him in fantasy, which helped kind of prop things up a little bit for me. But at the end of the day, no surprise from my end in terms of him taking this thing down. Louis Ustasen, poor Louis, he has finished second in so many majors. You kind of feel bad for the guy. He always seems to have a habit of throwing together one bad hole at the end of a tournament that really cost him. No difference at the U.S. Open this year. At least he has one major to show for it. Harris English ended up finishing third. He was not on my radar, but maybe he should have been. So I'm going to take another look at why he didn't maybe rate out as well for me in my modeling. But then Guido Mugliozi ended up finishing fourth. So he was a guy, if you listened to the first video, talked about at the beginning of the week, guy that no one has ever heard of, but he has a couple European Tour wins, a couple runner-ups. He's only 24. I think he has a world of upside and a long career ahead of him. I'm personally shocked he ended up finishing fourth, but we did look at the live stats on Saturday. I said that he was a prime contender to move up the board, and he did just that. Basically, he was doing everything through approach. If he turned it on with the putter over the weekend, he was going to contend and be right there. He did just that. He made some absolutely ridiculous putts on Sunday and put himself in the mix. And then Brooks, Colin, Xander, Rory, these guys were all kind of in it, but played themselves out of it with a couple bad holes. I think Colin made a bogey on a par 5. You can't do that, especially when everyone else is kind of getting there. Xander just continued to miss putts. I maybe should have recognized this earlier. He actually changed his putting style. So something that maybe the historical strokes gained putting numbers didn't pick up or wouldn't have picked up. So he really suffered. I think he lost 3 or 4 strokes putting at the end of the day. Still just immaculate ball striking numbers. Rory, really a double bogey. I think it was on 12 or 13. Really cost him, or else he would have been right there. He actually started the day 1 shot ahead of Rahm. So if you kind of drew it up, I'd take it every time. Basically guys that I had bet on starting ahead of the betting favorite entering Sunday, you feel like you come out on the other side of that better more often than not. Just didn't happen this week. Patrick Cantley played really well over the weekend, shooting 71-69, moved up in a big way. Again, kind of played himself out of it, though, early in the second round with that 75. But he's a guy that I definitely want to take a look at for this week. And moving a little bit further down, Justin Thomas, he kind of blew up there at the end as well. We can talk about Bryson really quick, too. He was actually leading entering the back 9 and then made a 7 and an 8 on the back. So to move from basically -5 all the way down to +3. So he is probably not feeling too great today. But, Bryson is a personal favorite of mine. I just love what he's doing with, just kind of breaking all of the models and completely changing his body to try and dominate the game, but just didn't work out for him yesterday. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things from the U.S. Open before he moved on. I thought it was, again, an absolutely phenomenal event, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully listen to me. I did not listen to myself, but if you did, I mentioned Jon Rahm as a completely viable strategy, just loading up on him. So if you guys did that, you ended up in a much better spot than yours truly this week. So that's okay. So moving on then into this week's event. So we have the Travelers Championship. It's played in Connecticut at TPC River Highlands. This course is actually one of the shorter courses on the PGA Tour. It's only 6,800 yards, 6,900 yards. So definitely an interesting dynamic this week, because I think it will put more guys in play. You don't need to bomb it off the tee to basically contend here. The other really important dynamic to this week is it's actually a Pete Dye design. So yes, it matters who designs the course. Pete Dye design courses are typically more technical, so you really need to be more accurate. You need to try and hit the ball in certain spots off the tee to set yourself up for good angles approaching the green. So there's a lot of blind shots that he sets up on his courses. So it's a completely different dynamic to maybe a longer venue where you can just bomb and gouge. You need to be a lot more technical and precise. So what I wanted to do is show you guys how I identify what stats are going to be important to look at this week. So I do a lot of research in terms of the course itself. Again, it's about 6,900 yards, Pete Dye design in Connecticut. And one thing that I think is really important is really, understanding kind of the scorecard and the layout. So what basically, you can get from the scorecard, and I'll show you another view of this in a second, what's the average length of some of these holes? So if you're, think about it this way, if it's a 450-yard hole, you're hitting it 300 yards off the tee, that leaves you about 150 yards into the green. There are certain players that excel with that sort of range, essentially. So your proximity to the hole from 150 yards might come into play. So if you just kind of scan the scorecard, you can kind of get a feel for that. I'll show you some data that I look at too that helps historically identify what types of shots are being hit, what's the average kind of length or proximity to the hole. So things that we can look at with respect to that. TPC River Highlands is also, from a putting perspective and a green surface perspective, is bent grass. So that'll set up guys that typically putt well on that surface versus maybe some others. I typically don't put a lot of weight on putting anyway, but it's something I want to take a look at. So that's just a quick breakdown from a field perspective this week. Not as strong as the U.S. Open, but we do have some big names in it. So maybe I'll just show you guys that real quick. So Bryson is in the field as of now. DJ's in the field. Cantley, Paul Casey, Brooks Koepka, all playing this week. Brooks does not like to play well in non-majors, but he is in the field this week. You have some other guys down the board. This is probably the range that I'll play in. Guys like Abraham Answer, Tony Finau, etc. So again, it's a solid field for sure. It's not nearly as strong as what we saw last week, which is probably expected. So in terms of some things that I like to look at, so in terms of the tools that I use, so Fantasy National, again, there's a lot of different features on this thing. I'll plug it every video, it seems. I wanted to look at basically historical conditions at the Traveler, so at TPC River Highlands. So what you can see, you can kind of get a breakdown of historical, by round conditions. What's the average scoring relative to par? What are the green surface, green firmness, green speed? So we can see almost every year we're playing on fast bent grass greens. In terms of the wind, we haven't seen too much out there. I think it's a tree-lined course, so that doesn't come into play as much. So again, this is just some more information to help us identify what stats might be important. So grab a couple things from here. The other thing I like to look at is, with respect to last year's event, who did well and how did they do it, right? So Destin Johnson won this thing last year. So he beat Kevin Streelman by a shot, Mackenzie Hughes, Will Gordon, who's a really young, I think he's a PGA Tour rookie, or was as of this event last year. This was kind of his breakout spot. He's kind of a bomber, doesn't do well with a lot of his other clubs in the bag, but he actually played really well this week. And then you have some shorter guys down here, like Ryan Armour's really short off the tee. He actually lost shots on approach. Anyway, all of this to say, right, what things really matter at this course, right? So you can see all of the guys in the top 10 gain strokes putting. That's no surprise. If you're going to win an event or contend, you got to bring the flat stick. So no surprise here. You can see Ryan Armour gained 7 strokes putting. Brendan Steele gained 9, which is absolutely crazy because Brendan Steele is not a good putter. But you can see how these guys showed up. You can see DJ was basically neutral off the tee and gained almost, again, outside of putting, gained almost all of his shots tee to green through approach. So that, again, speaks to the Pete Dye design. You need to be technical. You need to have a solid approach game, play well with your irons to contend at these types of courses. There are guys that do play well at Pete Dye designs in particular. So pointing out a couple of those, just again, historical trends on this. This is something I will probably put in the model. But guys like Siwoo Kim, Abraham Answer, they play really well. They just like Pete Dye designs. So they like the more technical, need to be accurate with your irons, that style of course. So I may put just in aggregate historical Pete Dye design experience into my model. Cantley is another guy as well. So you can see these guys all did play well at this event last year. Again, I don't think that's predictive in a vacuum because you can see Ryan Armour gained almost all of his strokes through the putter. That's not necessarily a predictive thing, right? But what you can see is that certain types of players do well at these sorts of courses, so we want to lean into that. The other thing I like to look at, so you can look at kind of a multi-year view of experience. So going back to 2016, you can see guys that have gained the most strokes at Pete Dye or at the Travelers at TPC River Highlands. So you can see Paul Casey has really solid course history. Again, I'm not necessarily a course history guy as the most predictive lens because you can get there a lot of different ways, but the consistency from Paul Casey is really interesting to me. You can see Bryson typically has played well. Now, again, a lot of this is back from when he decided to completely transform his body, but even last year, right, finished T6. Kevin Streelman has some solid history. He's a shorter hitter for sure. So again, you can kind of get a glimpse of, who's typically played well at this course in the past, something to consider, but something I'm not going to put a ton of weight on, right? I think there's a lot of ways to play well. And it just may so happen that in 2019, when you finished T8, Bryson, that you gained 10 strokes putting, right? That may not be predictive of future performance, but if he did this on approach, right, if he did this tee to green, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with that. So there's a glimpse of historical tournament history. The other useful tool inside of Fantasy National is really this breakdown of the entire course. You can see by hole historically where are folks making birdies. You can see the yardage for each hole. This is important because you can kind of get a glimpse of, again, on certain types of holes and how they're set up, who might have an advantage. The other thing you can get is, again, we looked at some of this on the previous view, but how are folks getting it done? So if you're finishing in the top 10, again, the most important angle is really approach and putting. We're not trying to predict putting every week. That's really hard to do. These stats are a little bit more stable, things that you can peg through some of the models. So we'll lean on approach, I'm guessing, a lot this week. In terms of, this is the view that I really wanted to focus on. So you can see from the scorecard kind of the breakdown of the holes. So you have 7 par 4s between 400 and 450 yards. That's something I plan on directly inputting into the model. So there are guys that, again, just kind of like that distance. They're able to, off the tee, get it into their target range, hit a solid iron into the green, and hopefully make their putt. So guys that play well on, par 4s that are 400 to 450 yards, something I want to take a really close look at. The other thing you can look at too is the kind of distribution of approach shots. So you can see what ranges, and again, I kind of highlighted this earlier, are kind of on average where people are going to be playing from. So you're going to be maybe the most frequently 25% of the time, about 150 to 175 yards from the hole off the tee. So whether you're using a 6, 7, 8 iron, whatever it is, we want to find guys that excel from that distance, right? And 125 to 150 is also pretty common. You also have some long 200 plus. I'm pretty sure all of those come from the par 3s, right? So you got one par 3 that's 239. You got another one that's 204. So I think that's a completely different kind of way of looking at things. So I may put long par 3 scoring into the model as well. So one thing with strokes gained approach is it doesn't factor in where you're hitting it from, right? But with a par 3, everyone's hitting it from the same spot, right? So it's a little different dynamic. So I'll probably put long par 3s into the model as well this week. And I think that'll pick up a lot of this 200 plus proximity. The other, there's a lot of stuff in here. You can see kind of relative to an average PGA Tour event. Again, this is the Pete Dye angle. Accuracy is really important. So again, I think this is a week where accuracy over distance off the tee matters a lot. You need to be kind of strategic about where you're putting the ball off the tee to set yourself up on a good line into the green. So I really want to take a look at that side of things, maybe not include strokes gained off the tee per se, but focus more on how many fairways these guys are hitting. So guys like Abraham Answer hit every single fairway and play well on Pete Dye. Here's a hint, I'm probably going to be betting Abraham Answer this week. But in terms of, some of this other information you can kind of get at, average proximity of the hole, it's actually better here than your average PGA Tour event, right? So just some other things that I kind of look at to try and identify key stats for the week. So for me, I'm going to be prioritizing accuracy over distance. I'm going to be prioritizing strokes gained approach. I'm going to be prioritizing your proximity from 150 to 175 and 125 to 150. And I'm also going to be bringing in par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards, as well as your 200 plus par 3 scoring. So to me, those are going to be kind of key stats for the week. I'm also going to bring in bent grass putting because I want to see who's typically done well from that perspective. And that's going to be it. That's going to be how I set up my models for the week. So again, just a glimpse in terms of how I look at this sort of thing, try and identify what to put in my model. This is what I'm looking at for this week's Travelers Championship, TPC River Highlands. So if you like the content, if you like the video, please give it a like, subscribe to my content, and we'll talk later this week. Talk about, some of the modeling, some of the guys that I like that I think can play well here this week, and how to set up the betting card, or how I'm going to set up my betting card for the week. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk later this week.